All right. Good morning, everybody. I've got 11 o'clock, so I think it's time to get started. Welcome to our second webcast in this new series that we have going called Watershed Hacks for Uncertain Times. This is a fun and interactive and relatively informal webcast series. We're already pretty informal at CSN, and we've ramped it down a little bit more for these couple. So we're excited for you to join us today. We are going to be talking about tree planting. So the second webcast in our series is we're calling Planting Trees for Your Kids' Future Forest Canopy. We think it is particularly apt given today's holiday. So we're excited to be talking about trees with a bunch of really great guests and folks that we're calling our tree planting hackers today. So, while we're all stuck at home, I think planting native trees and shrubs in your yard or on your property is a really excellent way to spend a little bit of time right now if you have the room and if you're able. But we're also going to talk about some ways to maintain maybe trees that you already have in your backyard, or maybe just take some advice that you can use the next time you want to volunteer for a tree planting as soon as things start to normalize a little bit. So throughout the webcast today, first I'll give just a quick refresher, an update on what this series is for folks who maybe are joining us for the first time today, because we do have more coming. We also are recording all of these sessions, so you can go back and watch the archives later in case you missed some or all of any of these webcasts. So we're going to be talking about planting trees and caring for trees with a little bit of a focus on sort of that family orientation. We're all at home. A lot of us with our children or our spouses, and ways that we can, engage with them a little bit while we get outside and get a little bit of fresh air, since we're otherwise pretty cooped up. We're going to have a lot of really good resources. We're going to try to focus on tips and tricks. I think a lot of you are probably pretty savvy, restoration, conservation, stormwater management folks. So we're trying to give you stuff that's maybe new, or new resources, or some advice that you're maybe not aware of today. But we also want you to chime in. We have the chat box available for most of the presentation. And then if we have some time at the end, we're going to open up the I'll call them the phone lines, I guess, I don't know, to let you weigh in, ask some other questions, give us your tips and tricks that maybe we didn't touch on today. So that we really want this to be a two-way conversation. So about the webcast series, I mentioned we have this series, Watershed Hacks for Uncertain Times. The idea is, we're all stuck at home right now, so let's talk about things that we can do at home. The idea is for all of these tips and lessons to be practical, things that you can do relatively affordably right now, and with materials that you can get a hold of. We don't have all of the same resources at our disposal as usual, so we're trying to talk a little bit about where you can find the materials that you would need to do some of these activities and things like that. We are trying to be very family oriented. We're going to talk today about some fun activities that you can do with your kids to get them involved in tree plantings. That's my daughter on our tree planting from a couple of weeks ago on the screen. And we're going to again, make it interactive. So share your ideas with us as well. As far as the other webcasts in the series, if you missed it last Friday, April 17th, we did one on, we called it Victory Rain Gardens. So again, focusing on how to implement a rain garden in your own backyard using materials that you might have handy, or that you could probably acquire online. Next Thursday, so the rest of these are going to be on Fridays, but next week we're going to be on Thursday at 11. I'm really excited about this one. It's stormwater art on your home ground. So some really cool examples of folks that have integrated artwork into their stormwater projects. We're going to talk about some small scale installations at schools, just to kind of give a little bit of an inspiration. And then we're going to take it down to sort of a local level, things that you can do to try to make it a little more fun, or bring this from STEM to STEAM, right? The academic terms, to integrate that art into your projects, your restoration projects. And then on May 7th, we are going to be doing sustainable lawns and family gardening. So we talked about rain gardens last week. We're going to be talking a little bit more about conservation landscaping, a little bit on the Zen approach to managing the grass that you might have in your yard, and then ways to get your kids involved in your gardening activities. So we have a really great cast of folks today. I am going to be the ringmaster, just sort of facilitating the discussion, doing some of the Q&A and all of that kind of stuff. Beth Ginter with the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals and the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council is going to be joining us. She's going to kick us off with sort of our introduction to our tree planting, sort of the basics, the 101 that you want to know. And then we're going to open it up. We're going to go to our hackers, Shireen Hughes, also with the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals, and Suzanne Etkin with the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. So really excited to have all of them. You all can please feel free when you come up to give a little bit more of an introduction if you want to tell folks a little bit more about what you do. You all have great programs, and I'm sure folks would like to hear about that as well. All right, so as you all know, if you've joined our webcast before, we do like to have a couple of polls to kick things off. They are not particularly informative. I don't think we're not gaining a lot of information from you other than just how fun you are and how much you love trees out of today's webcast. But our first poll question today is, we just want to know, your knowledge about urban trees is best characterized by the following statements. If a tree falls in the forest, are you the first one to know about it? Even if maybe nobody hears. You can identify a dozen urban tree species, but maybe you can't grow any of them. You've never had any luck keeping them alive. This time of year, your main concern with trees is that they make you sneeze a whole lot. It's just allergy focused concerns. And then hopefully I don't see any answers in that last category about getting an urge to start up your chainsaw. Oh man, we got one troublemaker already. And then our second poll question this morning, again, just a bit of fun, is to tell us where your head is at this morning in this Zoom world. So, you know, given the current situation, Cheetos are an acceptable breakfast food. Are you mostly just hoping that children or puppies will wander into somebody's screen during the webcast to entertain you? You've accepted the fact that you're non-essential as long as you can still buy toilet paper. And then last week, a lot of folks said that they were really concerned about setting up a bookshelf behind them so that they could look more professional on their Zoom accounts. But then I guess some of you realized you had CSN or maybe Schuler era CWP resources on your shelves, and you need to make sure you clear those off so you look a little bit more credible. All right, so I do like the responses. A lot of folks with their allergy concerns in number one, and a lot of folks that are the first to hear about it if a tree falls in the forest. And a lot of folks coming to terms with the fact that they are non-essential also. And also a lot of folks rooting for children and puppies, not surprisingly. The other thing that I want to offer up is not an official poll that we have going this morning, but we would love to know if you have a favorite tree. If you just want to type that into the chat box. We were all kind of talking about it before we got online this morning and wanted to know what your favorite tree species was. I was thinking about it this morning. I think I'm going to go with a sycamore tree as my favorite. I love the size. I love the giant leaves. They go great. It's a riparian planting. They do well in the stream corridors, deer resistant. So a lot to love about sycamore. So that's my favorite. I'll let everyone else kind of get to theirs, but it is National Arbor Day. So we are here to kind of appreciate trees as much as we can with today's webcast. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on is, again, sort of bringing home why we're framing this as sort of your kid's future canopy. There's a lot of really great things, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here. But when we're looking forward, a tree is one of those great things that you can do with your kids because it does grow with them in a lot of ways. You know, we planted trees with my daughter who's 1 because we are excited to sort of see those trees that she planted when she was 1 year old kind of grow up with her. I think that's a really cool and fun thing to do. In addition to all of these benefits that we know about with health and, you know, helping with health outcomes and climate resiliency benefits, again, looking sort of with that future eye towards reducing temperatures and things like that. So I won't dwell on it because I think a lot of you already know these things, but just that great reminder that these trees are one of the great things that you can do on your property. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Oh no, I had one other one. The best time to plant. So I guess Beth could have covered this as well. She knows this too. But you know, we're talking about it now. We had this slide, this presentation originally set for a couple weeks from now, but we moved it up because it's Arbor Day. It's also a great time to plant right now. Spring is an excellent time to plant, especially if you have some species like maybe some fruit trees where you want to avoid, you know, pushing them up against winter. For a lot of species, fall is even better. So there's a lot of great times to plant a tree. You just want to avoid those 4 to 6 weeks before the hottest temperatures in the summer and the coldest temps of the winter. But we're really talking about what we can do right now. So that's why we're here today. So with that, now I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth to kind of take us through the meat of our presentation today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. Great to be here this morning and to talk a little bit about trees. So as David said, I run the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program, but I'm a landscape designer by training. So tree planting is something that's really near and dear to my heart. And I think if there's anything that I'm an expert on, it is what not to do in your own garden. I've been gardening this same plot of land for about 23 years. And honestly, I went back to school and became a landscape designer because I was tired of making mistakes in my own garden. So I had no idea where that was going to take my career. But it's all been to good places. So hopefully I can help you guys avoid some of the same mistakes that I've made. And I think the first bit is really just to give it some thought. Many of us get really excited in the spring and we all go rushing off to the nursery, especially when we can't go rushing off to any place else. So it's exciting to get new plants, but you can save yourself a lot of headache and also a lot of money if you give some thought to what you are going to be putting in the ground, and not just what it's going to look like today or next month or next year, but what is that plant going to be like when it's mature. So a couple things to think about when you're choosing a tree. There's been a lot of, I think, great research lately that shows that planting trees could really save the world. If we did massive tree planting on a very large scale, we would be able to save the planet from our current carbon woes. But only native trees really provide the kind of habitat benefits that our wildlife needs. So that's the first consideration, is really just to think about planting a native because it provides not just shelter, but also food source for so many pollinators and birds and small mammals. They're really, the native species are really critically important to that. I'll talk a little bit more about site conditions in the next slide. Obviously, that's actually also critically important. And think about like what pleases you. So what features are you looking for in a tree? The pictures on this slide are all from one of my favorites, especially at this time of year, Cornus florida, which is our native dogwood. And those are all pictures that give you a sense of what that tree is going to look like for you over the course of the year. I think my favorite trees tend to change with the seasons, but this is one that is really lovely all throughout the year. Even in winter, when it's defoliated and the birds have eaten all of that lovely fruit, you have this great bark, so you have the seasonal interest throughout the year. One thing to think about also is what kind of disease or pest issues trees have. And certain species are susceptible to certain things. So our dogwoods, for example, are susceptible to anthracnose, and we've lost a lot of our native dogwoods from that. And so you should really be, if you want to plant a dogwood, which is a great understory tree and doesn't take up a lot of space, you should be looking for a dogwood that is anthracnose resistant. So either a cultivar that has been bred for disease resistance, like the Rutgers cultivars. the hybrids bred at Rutgers University, or there's a naturally occurring cultivar that has been, it's widely available in the nursery trade called Appalachian Spring. So those are just a couple of my thoughts about choosing the tree. And David, you can go to the next slide. So this list is from Doug Ptolemy from his research on the most valuable woody plants in terms of support for biodiversity in our region. So on the left are the trees and shrubs, and look at the top of the list. It is the mighty oak. This is also one of my favorites, and I would say if you have the space, if you are patient, if you are thinking about your children and future generations, for the love of all that is holy, please, please, please try to plant some oaks. We are living in a time when a lot of our bigger, more mature oaks are stressed, and we're losing a lot of them. So if you have the space and the inclination, I would definitely ask you to consider planting an oak. And this next picture is actually one of my oaks. This is Quercus alba, the white oak. And you can see all those little leaves are just bringing me that pollen that is really making me suffer. All right, so just like when you buy your house, you should think about location, location, location when you're buying a tree. So make sure that you're getting the right plant to put on your property. The big thing that people always underestimate is size. So this little schematic drawing just gives you a thumbnail overview of what you should be looking for in terms of where you can accommodate a tree. So look around, look up. Look to see what other trees you have. Do you have overhead power lines or other utilities either on the street? So if you're planting out along the street side, you should think about that. But also often we have overhead lines coming to our homes. So watch out for those lines when you're planting. Also look at your soil conditions. This is really critically important. How much moisture do you have on your property, and will the tree like that level of moisture? Also think about the pH, texture. Are you dealing with really compacted soils? Are they super sandy? Might you have a lot of dry conditions because you're up on top of a slope, or maybe you're in a kind of soggy area because you're along a creek or other waterway. So don't underestimate the importance of evaluating your soil before you begin, and pick a tree that will match with those conditions. Also think about light and wind. I live on a pretty small property. I have about 1/3 of an acre and I have 10 mature trees. I do not have a lot of sun. So for me, I am squeezing in some oaks, and I am also looking for spots where understory trees will grow, things like a dogwood or a kyananthus or a redbud, because they do not need so much space and they'll be happy in the shade under the oaks. All right, next slide. So I mentioned looking up, lighting. Also, sometimes we have signs in front of our property. You also want to look at what's happening on the ground plane, and don't forget that you need to know where your utilities are, and also things like where's your sewer lines and septic tanks. All right, next slide. So just a word of warning about pavement and trees. They do not make very good companions, and tree roots can really damage pavement, and it's not great for a tree to be sited in a little tiny spot like this, because the roots really need access to water and nutrients. And if they can't get it, they may survive, but the trees will end up being really stressed. And that is not good for the trees, and ultimately not good for you, especially if it's grown to be a very large tree and you have to remove it because it's been damaged or stressed, because it just isn't getting those nutrients. Next slide. Oh, there's another picture. Isn't that a nice one? So this is actually my neighbor's driveway entrance, and they have a massive oak tree, and it's in this little raised island that's all covered with English ivy. This is what we would have called in high school a glamour don't. Yes, please don't do this. All right, so once you decided what tree you're going to plant, a few other things that you're going to need to think about: the tree, the shovel, water. Soil amendments are optional, but you might think about putting in some compost if you have really compacted soil. I've been using mycorrhiza or biochar to mix in with the native soil when you're backfilling. A little bit of mulch. We'll talk more about mulch in a minute. Stakes and fasteners. So, and tree shelters. You notice here I've said if necessary. I planted a lot of trees on residential properties. For the most part, I do not use these. If you have a deer issue, you may need to protect your tree with some sort of a tree shelter. If it's a tiny tree, it could be a tree tube. If it's a larger tree, some sort of fencing around the trunk to keep deer from eating it, but also from rutting or rubbing against the bark, which can be really damaging to young trees. Here's the key. If you're going to put a tree shelter on, you have to maintain it. I have seen so much damage done from tree shelters that were left. If you're using a tree tube, you really have to be careful because lots of critters like to live in there. And they can get in and do a lot of damage to the tree if you're not careful. Stakes and fasteners. Again, I usually do not recommend staking trees on a residential site. The one exception for me is if you're in a super, super windy site, like you're right on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay where it never stops blowing, you may consider doing putting stakes in, but please be careful. Use proper equipment. Don't use wire. What you want is like a stretchy, almost fabric-based fastener that will allow the tree to expand. And then you must go back and remove it about a year after installing, because if you don't, the fasteners can really begin to eat into the bark of the tree, and you end up with all kinds of disease problems or pests, but you might actually really damage or kill the tree. Chicken there, that's Speckles, one of my hens. She is optional. Actually, she's not for me. She's one of my original hens that I've had for about 7 years. The only one to survive a big fox attack a couple years ago. She's a lovely creature. I'm very happy that she lives with us. Do keep an eye out for your pets when you're planting trees, and have a plan for making sure that your pets are not gonna dig them up or scratch them up or damage them. Okay, so tree planting, this is not rocket science. Most of you have probably done this before, but there are a couple things that I think are really important. Make sure that you dig a nice wide hole. Do not dig a deep hole, dig a wide one. So 2 to 3 times the width of the root ball, and the sides should angle out like this, gently sloped. And the bottom of the planting hole, the root ball should sit right on that, so that the flare of the trunk at the top of the root ball is actually right above the grade. Make sure when you put the tree in that you break up any bound roots. If you are planting a bigger tree that has that's balled and burlapped, you need to remove that burlap and at least lay it flat. If you can get it out altogether without wrecking the root ball, you could do that. If you can't, keep it in there. Just make sure that you snip any wire and then loosen it up so that the roots have some place to go. Choose your poison there or your pleasure, I'm not sure what. You're going to use that native soil that you removed, and you can mix in whatever kind of stuff you want to or not. If you don't have soil amendments, that's okay. And then you're going to put just a little bit of mulch on the top of the tree, but you're going to make sure that that mulch is not mounded up against the tree. More on mulch volcanoes in just a minute. I already talked about stakes and flexible tires, not wire, and make sure, you know, if you've got deer or other creatures, that you've got some protection. And then as soon as you get that guy in the ground, you're going to plant it really, really well. Water it really, really well. All right, so here is a tree planting spec. You can see in that slide the little hash marks. If you're not used to reading these sorts of plans, the little hash marks, that's your native soil, and then the little dotted soil in the center is your planting hole. And you can see there that the top of that root ball is just above the grade. Probably the most common mistake that people make when they're planting trees is planting them too deep. So please don't do that. All right, next. All right, here is the mulch volcano. Another please, please, please do not mulch volcano your trees. The picture that now has the red X shows that mulch really mounded up against the tree trunk. Landscape contractors, maintenance crews, I love you all, but please don't do this to your trees. I see this so often. I really embarrass my kids a lot because I park the car and I get out and I dig the mulch back from the tree and they have their heads like this. What are you doing, mother? And I say, I'm saving the tree. That mulch mounted up against the tree trunk holds moisture on the tree, and that's a recipe for all kinds of rot or burrowing critters. So the picture on the right is the smiley face picture, and that shows you just a little bit of mulch, a couple inches at the most, to help keep the weeds down, keep moisture in, but don't have it touching the trunk of the tree. All right. So initial care, water, especially through the first growing season. What I recommend is really, really deep, slow watering, a good soaking once a week, unless we have a lot of rain. So think 1 inch of rain per week. If the tree is not getting that from Mother Nature, then you get to supplement that. So I like a hose in my hand, slow running, that I can really soak the entire root ball of the trees. Sprinklers, not so good. Drip irrigation, okay if you have it set up properly. Watering can, also okay, and great for kids. Make sure that you don't plant turf grass right up to the trunk of the tree. One of the reasons for not doing that is so that your lawnmower doesn't ever have to come in contact with the tree. That's a really common way the trees get damaged is by lawnmowers and string trimmers as well. So make sure that you keep that mulch circle. I say don't plant flowers and cultivate soil under tree, and yet I do. And I think there are ways to do that if you're very careful. Just keeping in mind that, especially under mature trees, the most important roots in the system are within the first couple inches of soil. So think that roots really spread out to that whole canopy of the tree. And if you do a lot of digging, you're really impairing the health of the tree. I don't fertilize my trees at all. They have occasionally been fed, but very rarely. And it's really not recommended that you feed them when they're stressed. So if a tree is not doing well, or if it's a real drought year, please be really careful with fertilizer because you can sometimes do more harm than good. And definitely don't feed trees during the first year at all. I try to pretty much leave them alone, trees and shrubs, for the first year. And then again, make sure that you get all of that stake and strapping off the tree 1 year after planting. All right, so watering, I have some mature trees, and when we had the very, very bad drought, recently I was out there watering my trees. So if it's a very bad drought, even mature trees will need some water. I think for the most part, I usually tell clients to stop watering them after a year. But when you have drought, especially in that first 4 to 5 years, you're probably going to water those young trees again. So just remember, they're kind of like your babies. You have to make sure they're getting what they need. And if Mother Nature can't provide it, then you are on tap. Mulch, yes, don't over mulch. I think we have a tendency as a society, we all get excited in the spring and we love that smell of brown mulch. So I try to get people to wean themselves off of it. Plant a full garden instead. It will help keep the weeds out. Pruning late winter is a great time, and again, usually not in the first year unless there's an issue. I always recommend finding a good arborist, especially if you have mature trees that you want to take care of and help preserve them for the future. It's really good to have a certified arborist that you trust to give you an assessment of what's going on with your trees. And there's, if you do need to prune a larger branch, there's a technique picture there on the right that just shows you're actually going to make 3 cuts, and that just prevents you from splitting the wood when you are trying to cut it off. So you're making a cut and then you're cutting it farther out, and then you come back towards the branch, towards the main central leader of the tree. And another pet peeve that I have is people who sort of hack off limbs in the middle. So if I'm a tree and this is my limb, try not to cut it at the elbow. You want to try to cut back to the shoulder. And that helps to prevent diseases as well. All right, what else have we got? Oh,
I think we're
the end of my talk.
Yeah, we're on to resources now, and we did have a couple of questions come in, and I'll talk through some of the resources, and then we'll hit the couple of questions that came in the chat, and then we'll get to our hacker discussion. So we just wanted to, a big part of this, and one of the questions I will address is we will have this slide deck available. It'll be posted on our website at the same address where you used to register today. And so we'll have the full recording as well as the slides so that you can just click on these links directly. They're all hot links, and the table and stuff like that. Someone asked about the table from Doug Tallamy about the habitat value of the different tree species. And so that'll be in there as well. So you can go and download that and be able to take a look. And so we just wanted to go through them, take a look, and provide a couple of things that we like. We sort of talked and exchanged emails about some different resources that we all use. First, I'll do our shameless plug for our CSN resource. We do have our homeowner's guide for a more bay-friendly property. This covers a wide range of residential practices, so tree planting is in there. A lot of the tips and tricks that Beth just mentioned are in that guide, as well as some of those images and diagrams. It's pretty brief, so if you want something that's nice, short, and sweet, it's a pretty good resource for you. It also covers, like I said, other residential practices. There's a lot in there on rain gardens. Rainwater harvesting stuff like rain barrels are in there as well, conservation landscapes. So pretty comprehensive, but wanted to make you aware of that. If you want something that's on the how-to end of the spectrum, but much more intensive, the Urban Watershed Forestry Manual Tree Planting Guide, something that Tom worked on a number of years ago with a bunch of other partners, is a lot of detail in there. That guide is, probably closer to 100 pages. Obviously, there's a good table of contents you can kind of pick through and find what you're looking for. It also is good if you are looking to take some of this and apply it to more of a community scale instead of just in your backyard. But it does have some great information on site information, tree species selection considerations and things like that. There's a ton of really great resources on tree ID and picking the right selections. There's a couple of books that Beth recommended that are really good depending on your level of expertise and the level of detail that you want. There's pocket-sized guides, the Tree Finder Guide, the Fandex Family Field Guides. I use these, and I think that they're really good.
I love them.
Person, I think they're really great, but they're really good for kids. as well. If you're more of a plant geek, the tree book is a new one. And Beth, I don't know if you want to talk about any of those in any more
Yeah,
detail.
you know what? Here's something really hilarious. Here's I always try to prop my computer up when I'm doing Zoom calls. Look, here it is. This is Michael Durr's new book. So those of you who are plant geeks, he's sort of the guru of woody plants in America, and this is his new book. I have a signed copy, which I'm very pleased to have. So if you're really into trees, it's a great resource.
The native plant finder link down there is great. I like that you can kind of just punch your zip code in, and you can get a good list of native plant species by your zip code with the high habitat value and things like that. So it makes it easy to kind of search for something that might work in your specific area. More tree and plant resources. There's a Bay-wide native plant guide. This one is more than just trees. It has trees in there, but it's great for conservation landscaping and things like that as well. Plant Virginia natives, if you're a Virginia local, it's a downloadable plant brochure for the different ecoregions. I also put one in here, the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy. Suzanne has put a link up on a doc that I guess you guys are kind of editing as you go along, that has nurseries that are doing delivery in Maryland for folks that are working on, being very careful and maintaining your social distancing. These folks will deliver. Suzanne, can you talk about that for just a second, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. That was a really an Anne Arundel County specific document. I think it's just best. I like the idea of just call your local nursery, see if they'll deliver. And we just have a very short amount of time to get trees in for the spring yet. And it's, I think, a good time right now to think about planning for the fall, because there really is a lot to do, as Beth said, in terms of planning before you get to the planting. So that's great for folks in Anne Arundel County.
Great. And then this last table is stuff that I just kind of lumped into, I call it a fun stuff category. So videos and projects that are tree related that I think are potentially good ways to engage your kids and your families, or just to explore on your own. There's a really good video series from Ryan Davis at the Alliance called Tree Talks, and this is a series of YouTube videos that are all pretty short. They kind of help orient you about the trees that are in your woods. So you can go species by species and talk a little bit about them. There's one on tree plantings in there as well. But it's a good series. I enjoyed it. Discover Your Forest is a cool website with a bunch of activities for kids to kind of get them engaging with nature. There are tree specific ones, but there's like a million different things in there, and you can just kind of click around, and they kind of have some step-by-step ways of setting up these different activities depending on, do you want to do something that's more of a nature walk, or do you want to do something with bugs on a small scale in your backyard, or whatever. So there's some cool resources there. Shireen is going to talk a little bit about the scavenger hunts using Tree Leaf ID, I think in our hacker session. And then iNaturalist is a cool app that you can get on your phone for sort of crowdsourcing species identification. You can take pictures of things that you find, and get help from other citizen scientists and folks that can help you ID your species. And it can actually go into a database of folks that are looking to just kind of know what is around your particular area. So another kind of cool thing to play around with that kids might find interesting as well. All right, so before we get into our other tree planting hacks, I do just want to touch on a couple of questions that I saw come in the chat during Beth's talk. They're sort of on the recommendation side of things for some species recommendations. One of them was on the sort of street tree arena, and I'll sort of let any of you three address this if you want. But basically, they have these, flowering pear trees that the builders kind of come in and they plant along the street, and they're either dying or the folks are looking to replace those. And, if you have any recommendations for trees that might do well sort of along the sidewalks in that street tree arena, maybe that thrive on a little bit less soil volume or something like that.
Yes, don't plant Bradford pears, please. And they're a disaster. I mean, not only are they extremely invasive, but they, because of their branching structure, the branches are really close together. And so when they get big, the weight of the branches, they just split apart. So they're also just a mess. So yeah, I mean, if you have a little bit of shade, I think redbuds do really well. They're pretty tough. They are, they'll take some soil compaction. I don't like to put them out in the blazing sun, but if you get if they have a little bit of shelter, I think they do really well. If you're not underneath a power line, I think you could look at something like swamp white oak is a good native. Willow oaks tend to do pretty well. What else, guys? What else do you think, Suzanne? Shireen?
Well, a lot of trees get stressed in that area because there's not enough fruit space for them to grow. And I was trying to think of like a replacement to the Bradford pear, and often I suggest the service berries, but not as a street tree because it has fruit and then the fruit drops on the ground and people would be unhappy with that. If you wanted a small tree and it's sunny, maybe the fringe tree, native fringe tree might be an option. I think it's really hard because that area is gets very stressed because it's next to pavement. A lot of the trees that do really well in very wet conditions, like the bald cypress, actually do well in low oxygen conditions and sometimes make good street trees too. That's something I've discovered.
But you got to have space for bald cypress, yeah.
Yeah.
Another species type of recommendation for the oak trees, you know, the importance of planting those oaks. Someone asked about any specific suggestions. They're at a sort of a higher elevation with like a rockier soil, but they're losing their chestnut oaks. And so if there's any oak species that you particularly like or might recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider replanting some chestnut oaks unless you think they are infected with something. But chestnut oak is great for that condition. If you can get them, white oaks, also scarlet. The swamp white oak, you would think can only take swampy conditions, but that's not true. They actually do really well in stressful situations like street trees. And I think you could probably, you could probably also look at a willow oak, or I'm not a big fan of the pin oak, but a lot of them will tolerate that.
I wanted to just jump in and add that Josh Clark, which is WSA's restoration coordinator, he's on and he can chat in, but he's been working on a resilient tree species list for our Replant Anne Arundel program. Awesome. And basically this list, which will be up on our website, and Josh can maybe put in the chat the website of where it will be posted. I think it's still going through the last little bit of refinement, but it sort of took the DNR tree list and ran it through a bunch of the Forest Service models in terms of what's coming forward on climate stresses and potential diseases. And then it was further refined by sort of local Anne Arundel County folks, and then further refined by, what's really available at nurseries. So there's a list of both smaller understory trees and then larger trees. But in the oak family, those that made the list are the white oak, the swamp white oak, the willow oak, the chestnut oak, and the northern red oak. So those are the ones that made that particular list. And of course, they all have different desires in terms of where they like to be planted. But it's really a good idea to think about when you're planting a tree that tree is going to be around in times that are going to be very different than what they have been historically in terms of climate and pests and diseases and all that kind of thing. So you want to think toward the future, and this list is a beginning part of doing that. So thanks, Josh, for helping to put that together. And there might be other people online that helped with that or know much more about that than I, so feel free to chat.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thanks, Josh. You did put the link in the chat so folks can
Awesome.
find out where that's going to be soon. Also wanted to let folks know in the chat, Julie Mayhorter, thank you. You put a couple of links in here for the Pennsylvania tree selection guide is in there, as well as the Forest Service has a tree owner's manual that she linked to in the chat as well that are good resources. So thanks, Julie. I'm gonna go ahead and keep kind of moving us through, take us into some of our hacker discussions. I had a couple of prompt questions. Please feel free to keep kind of chiming in with your questions. The first one that I just wanted to kind of get to was, you know, the best way to get the tree that you want in our current situation with COVID-19. Obviously, we're kind of stuck at home. You can't go to the nurseries the way that you used to. And so, you know, Suzanne, you talked about this a little bit for the resources that are there for Anne Arundel County and kind of calling up your local nursery. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that, or that's...
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Beth and Shireen, did you guys have anything, any other suggestions on your end for acquiring these trees during COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for smaller trees, one thing that's really lacking this spring are native plant sales. Almost all of them that I know of have been canceled, which is so disappointing. But if you can reach out to some of those smaller native nurseries, you know, you may find that you're able to do like a curbside pickup or something. So I made a plug for them last week. I will plug for them again. And I know the wholesale nurseries they're doing booming business. So if you have access to wholesale, you're probably going to have good luck.
And I would add that I've called local native nurseries, and the way they're handling it is you make an appointment to come and pick up plants from them. So there's still a business that's allowed to stay open.
Yeah, and I picked up several hundred plugs the other day, and they were just waiting for me. I paid by credit card. I went, I picked them up, and I drove away. So it was pretty easy.
Yeah, and if I'll also say that for folks, if you're not sure where or what your local nurseries are, while it wasn't a tree-specific webcast last week in our rain garden webcast, we had a bunch of links in the resources section on different local nurseries, both wholesale and retail, that you can check out sort of state by state, depending on where you are, if you need a little bit of help finding where you want to look. All right. Another question that comes up decently often is if you guys have opinions on, you know, what type of tree stock to actually get or to start with, whether you should go with a seedling, a container grown, or a ball and burlap stock. Suzanne, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have to give a little shout out again to Josh, who I don't know if you put in his slide next, but we can go to it in a minute. But, you know, when we were doing Replant Anne Arundel, we really wondered, you know, what kind of trees should we really plant? What's the best? What's the best for survivability? And he interviewed a whole bunch of people around the state that are doing trees and have done a lot of trees, and, you know, where do you spend your, you know, biggest bang for the buck? And here's the rundown. So this time of year, you see a lot of bare root seedlings that are distributed, the backyard buffers that is all over the state. The bare root seedlings are good because they're small, they're easy to ship or get, but the survivability of a seedling tree is sometimes limited. It's a little tree, it's a little baby. Think about if you put your baby out in your yard, you really have to pay attention to it. So these are really low cost trees, and they're used to plant broadly across, you know, sites maybe that where you plant them densely and you think, you know, one out of every couple trees is going to survive, and that might just be okay. In the residential or community setting, you often see these really big, gigantic trees getting installed with new houses. That's what we call the balled and burlap trees or bound and burlap trees. Those trees, are big and showy and great, but they're way too big for a volunteer or even a one person to plant. They're very expensive, and to be honest, there's a lot of transplant shock. And so if you plant one of those trees and 5 years you come back and it might be just as big, only as big as a smaller potted tree, the one that's circled in the middle, and we call those the Goldilocks trees. They're not too small, they're not too big, but they're just right. And so these are trees that are going to get in there. They're going to be pretty self-sufficient, more self-sufficient. But they're not going to have a lot of transplant shock. They're easy to plant, pretty survivable. And then if you're looking at stormwater credits, again, those that are in the crediting world, there's a lot of discussion now about exactly what size is going to be creditable very specifically, but we are planting in the 0.5 to 1 inch caliper tree that is 4 to 6 feet, about a 5 gallon. And that's what we think is the Goldilocks tree.
Great. I want to go to this next question, and I'm going to direct this one for Shireen, about trees that are things you want to avoid. We talked about the Bradford pear a little bit, but things that besides just invasive also maybe disease prone, or if you don't want to talk about any specific things off the top of your head, maybe places where you can find good resources on the best native plant selection.
So I'll just kind of quickly name a couple of invasive species besides the Bradford pear. Norway maples, mimosa or silk tree is another one, princess or the paulownia tree, and a couple of the mulberries, the paper mulberry and the white mulberry. I listed this as an alternative. It's for Virginia, but the nice thing about it is they have a page that you could go to that lists the native alternatives to invasive plants. And there's another resource that will come up in a couple other slides called the invasive plant invaders of the mid-Atlantic, and that's another great one. So rather than go into all of these, I think just that there are some trees that we have, like the dogwood that Beth mentioned, chestnut. Chestnuts have chestnut blight, elms are another one that are diseased, and so we wouldn't recommend planting them unless you know that it's a cultivar or nativar that has demonstrated resistance to those. You can go on, I guess.
Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about tree tubes already. Beth did in the initial talk, but I just wanted to see other thoughts. I think Suzanne, I wanted to ask you, just get a rounded take on tree tubes, because I get different, depending on where you look online, if you're looking for guidance on it, I get very different answers on tree tubes depending on where you look.
Okay, so here's what our friends at DNR told us. And again, this is a Goldilocks approach. And I can't underscore enough the things that Beth already said about tree tubes. Things get caught in there, wildlife gets caught, you can sort of trap some critters and things and moisture against your trunk. So you have to be careful. So you trade in one protection for another. But the general rule of thumb is that it was recommended to use partially ventilated tree shelters so that you get a little bit of light, but also that protects against the deer rubbing, which I think that's the biggest problem for trees and trunks, is really the rubbing of the antlers, that velvet on the trees. So the partially ventilated tree shelters are the ones that have been recommended to us by Department of Natural Resources. I'm sure other people could chime in with their favorite, but again, you can't keep them on forever.
So I just wanted to share something I learned recently, that when they're doing the plantings for riparian buffers and they put those shelters on, voles get up in
Yes.
between the tree and the shelter and start eating away at the tree.
Yeah.
And so there's some work being done where they put a gravel bed around the base, and that keeps the voles away. And it's just some interesting research that's being done. It seems to be effective.
So I wanted to next kind of shift. This was a question that kind of came into the chat box as well, but the question about, you know, maybe we're not all planting trees right now, but how do we deal with the vines that might be growing up and around our tree? The question in the chat was sort of, are there any good vines that are, you know, harmless that we are going to leave in place, or should they all be coming out because they're providing, you know, they're stressing our trees too much? So it's sort of a two-part question, one of which is how do we deal with the invasives, and the other part is, you know, maybe they're not all invasive, what are we leaving, you know, in place there? So I'll sort of let this one go to whoever wants to jump in on this one.
Go ahead, Shereen.
Well, I think there is a slide that talks about ivy, so maybe we can let Suzanne talk about the ivy. But
yeah, no, like, yeah. So the ivy, so if you go to the Ring of Life, it is sometimes impractical to remove all of the English ivy from a site. So and this is a great time of year to be getting out and doing this, we call it creating a ring of life around a tree. And basically you make two cuts, you know, 2 or 3 feet up, you're gonna cut the ivy vine, and then you're gonna cut it 2 or 3 feet out from the base of the tree and essentially clear the ivy from the base of the tree. One thing you have to be really careful of, though, is that as you're removing those vines, if they really have their little tendrils into the bark, don't be tempted to pull the vines off of the bark, because you can damage the bark. So if you really just concentrate on that 2 to 3 feet around the tree, it sort of gives the tree a head start. It's not important to cut to pull the vines off the tree. Again, that'll damage the tree, but those vines will eventually fall down once they die. So creating that ring of life, really simple, easy, and really important, because ivy can really kill a tree.
so I actually use that similar method for other vines like wisteria, and just cut. I don't try and yank the wisteria branches that go up into the branches out of the tree, because I'm afraid I'll damage it, but I cut them at the base of the tree and then pull up any of the roots or the runners that are running along. Same with honeysuckle. Alana, who has been working with us on this from West Virginia, was cutting grapevine, which is native. And I like having grapes in my yard, but the vine can get really heavy on the canopies of the trees and bushes. So I cut it back pretty regularly. There are a lot of natives that grow in the trees. I mean, up the trees that won't harm the trees at all. And there is a native honeysuckle that isn't really invasive at all. It's beautiful. So I think it's just, first of all, use iNaturalist or those other references to figure out if it's invasive, and then if it's starting to kind of overwhelm the tree, that's when I would say cut it back at the base. The other thing I wanted to warn people about is leaves of 3 and hairy vines. You might want to let it be, or make sure that you're really protected. It's poison ivy, and it can be a nightmare to manage. And don't burn poison ivy. I have a friend who was around it one time and got it in her lungs. It was horrible. So, Beth, did you want to add anything else?
No, I think, yeah, the poison ivy, just especially if you're doing vine removal before the leaves are out. You just have to be super careful because you can still, even without the leaves, you know, that those furry vines on the trees can really get you.
Yeah. In terms of the invasive plant control methods, I was really thinking around trees. I don't know if solarization would actually work around trees because you have to do a lot of, you'd have to cover the ground with plastic and then you wouldn't get water to the tree roots. So I don't,
Yeah, I probably wouldn't solarize. It works best in full sun.
Yeah, I think I just focus on hand removal, mowing, cutting in terms of vines. Girdling is something you would do with an invasive tree. But all the ones in the lower part of the list are things I would have an expert do. You might even need a permit. I would, you know, if you're dealing, actually I forgot to say my background is, I worked in hydrogeology and worked on hazardous waste sites for a long time. So I'm very concerned about overuse of chemicals or somebody not knowing what they're doing. So you should work with a pesticide applicator, somebody with a license, I think. There's also goats as an option. And I've heard in areas where where kudzu's bad or some of the vines are really bad, they've let goats loose and the goats have nibbed it to the ground. So
yeah, I've actually worked with a goat herd, and they did it. The goats were amazing. They ate everything, up to about 6 feet. It comes back, but it was great.
If you keep the vines or any small trees or any plants cut down low to the ground and you keep cutting them back for about 2 to 3 years, the plants will die, the root structure dies in place. So that's the method I tend to use just because, first of all, I just don't have the time. I live in a 1950s house and we've got lots of invasives in my yard, so I'm always trying to manage invasives, and that's the way I do it.
All right, so for folks who were concerned, it's 12 o'clock now. We're gonna kind of keep rolling. If you have to jump off, that's fine. We will have the recording posted and you can catch these last couple questions later. As long as you guys are okay to stick around a little bit longer, we'll plan to go until about 12:15 or so. So we get this question, and Beth, you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, about what to do in the understory of your trees. A lot of folks, especially in their backyards, they get a little bit concerned, with all the shading and stuff like that. They can't get anything to grow down there, but you also don't want to damage your tree roots. Are there any suggestions for things that folks can do in that understory of your trees? Maybe Beth, I'll start with you.
Are there some slides? I think Shireen had some slides. Yeah, Shireen, do you want to talk about your slides?
Why don't I start with mine and then Beth can share her yard. So this is my yard. It's the lazy alternative. I tend to go with what would nature do. That previous slide was actually showing a wet area, and originally we thought about how do you handle a dry area, so dry shade. And I just wanted to say that I've lived in my house for 18 years and I had moss in the front yard and I had some native plants and some grass mixture because somebody else had tried to get grass established in this area, and it doesn't like, grass doesn't like this area. So I've kept it mowed and allowed the native plants to take over. So if you could click the next ones, I'll show you what this is a combination of. So there's a native grass called poverty grass that grows really well, and it just kind of, when it sends up its grassy spikes, it gets to be about, I don't know, maybe a ½ a foot high. So you keep that mowed and it stays green, and then it has these kind of curly brown blades that hang around all wintertime. And then I had just a small amount of this partridge berry, and now it's just spread throughout this area, and it's intermingled with the moss. and it's beautiful. It has little pink berries pink flowers that'll come up, and then little red berries in the wintertime. The other thing that's kind of amazing are these bluets. I call them little fairy flowers. They grow, the basal leaves are very tiny, and you can't really see them, but the flowers come up on these little light stems, and they're the beautiful little blue flowers with little yellow centers, and it's growing in with the moss. To the right is a rattlesnake weed, and those are the basal cells, so they're very flat growing. So really it's on a plane, it's not like messy different levels. I just keep it mowed for whatever pops up. And then I've kept it as kind of a lawn-like look, and then I have some other plants growing up naturally, and they're shrubs, and I just dig them out and I move them to another area in my yard where I want higher plants. And then Carex pennsylvanica, Pennsylvania sedge, any of the Carexes are kind of a great soft grass-like alternative, and you can just let them grow, and you could get a monoculture if you wanted, but environmentally it's nicer to have a range and mixture. Next one.
So that's my front yard. So on the left, on the far left, you can't see it very well, but behind that big chestnut oak is Carex pennsylvanica. So it's really shady behind those trees and between the big trees in the house. Which, by the way, if I were planting them, I wouldn't plant them quite so close to my house. They were here long before us. But that Carex pennsylvanica is great for dry shade. It grows more slowly when it's very shady. It will also take some sun. Some Carexes do not want to be in that darkness, but this one does. There's 3 or 4 that I use kind of interchangeably. And then I've got dogwoods. There's a few and a few non-native shrubs that I can't live without, and also Helleborus orientalis Lenten rose, which is also not native. But almost everything else there's a bunch of daffodils that you can see that are very happy there. But I've got Virginia bluebells and Pachyra golden groundsel, which is equally happy in sun or shade. It loves it there in this dry hilltop underneath the oaks, and really pretty yellow flowers going on right now. But you can also put it in a rain garden. It's one of my favorite, most versatile plants. And then a couple of other shrubs, Itea virginica and Leucothoe axillaris, which are also native. Hydrangea quercifolia is not native here in the Maryland Piedmont. It's native further south, but I use it a lot. It's a great understory shrub.
So the first picture that you showed us where you posed the question was actually wet. And my other job, besides the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Certification Program, is I'm Assistant Director of Wetlands Watch. So I would like to encourage people to stop trying to grow grass in wet areas. It doesn't grow. It's just a contradictory type of plant material. So, I went for a walk in the woods near my house, and I looked for what was growing in nature together in a similar condition. And I took this picture. And so Pachyra is also growing in a wet area. So it grows in dry or wet areas. There's Carex species that are growing, the sedges. Ferns, there are ferns that grow in dry areas, ferns that grow in wet areas, jack in the pulpit. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of variety of plants that will grow in those areas. And my suggestion is that if you're going to plant in those areas, try and use plugs. They're smaller, you'll have less disturbance to the root system, or smaller shrubs and smaller understory trees around the roots of the bigger trees. So, there's less disturbance. Don't just try and dig up a whole bed. So that's it, I think.
Great. So I think this is the last one that we had for you all today. And we wanted to talk a little bit about ways to involve your kids and get them excited about trees. I think, just the planting itself can be a fun thing. Just taking the advice that we got earlier today on just how to plant and just kind of helping them get involved. But there's some other really cool activities and ideas that you can do with those kids. We mentioned some of them in the resources section, but first I wanted to kind of go to Shireen. You sort of mentioned these tree ID guides and maybe turning them into a scavenger hunt type of activity. If you could kind of talk a little bit about that idea.
Yeah, so we already talked about iNaturalist, and it's not just plants, it's birds, it's butterflies, so you can use it in a lot of different ways. If you go to the next slide, the leaf key for common broadleaf trees, they have all these pages of beautiful pictures. You could take these pictures and laminate them, print them out and laminate them, and then go out on a scavenger hunt in the woods or in your yard and try and find the most oak leaves, or ask them to look for what's a compound leaf and find a compound leaf or something like that. The other thing is, what I used to do as a kid is I used to collect leaves and I would press them between wax paper and iron it, and then had my collection. So I've been kind of a naturalist for a long time, but that's a fun way. You can create your own collection. They could create their own book. They could create their own journals. So I think there's so many things to do, and they can just sit outside and observe how many birds do they see, how many different kinds of birds do they see in your yard, and have a contest. So that's it.
Yeah, I think there's a reason that we all wound up in this profession, because I can say that doing these scavenger hunts was like my favorite thing as a kid, going out and trying to find all of these different things. And so it can be a really fun activity. The other one that I wanted to mention was, Suzanne, you had this idea of, for engaging kids in, observations and things like that. You want to talk a little bit about this idea?
Yeah, sure. So I've been an environmental educator for most of my professional career. And I've done a whole lot of activities out in nature. And when we first went on quarantine, I was like trying to look for what activities can I do with my daughter outside. She's 10. And what I quickly understood is that doing environmental education with your children is very different from doing environmental education with somebody else's children. So anytime I would try to engage her in like an activity, she would be, like, talk to the hand. I don't want anything to do with that. And so I've really gone back to sort of the basics of really helping her hone her own observational skills, and really sort of helping her to discover rather than for me to teach her. And then I can sneak in a little teaching. But I think when I'm talking to all of you very knowledgeable people, naturalists out there in the world, if you have kids, forget that you know anything about the natural world. Forget it. Just help your kids observe and find themselves. So I want to show you a little thing that I did with Rose. So I have to say, if I said my favorite native tree, it would be a sweet gum. And the reason is that they are so maligned. Sweet gums, we hate their gumballs, and those, that green pollen gets everywhere. But observing them up close has really given me a new appreciation for them. So first of all, I went outside my window just now and plucked this little leaf, and it's just so fragrant. But what Rose and I have been doing is we took pictures of just this one little bud through the quarantine. And I wish I had thought of this idea 2 weeks earlier, because it looked very much different. But David, if you just want to like flip through the different, how this sweet gum has changed, that was really supposed to be April 7th. Sorry. So the 5th, the 7th, and then the next one on the 10th, there it is. And then again on the 17th. And then just a couple days ago on Earth Day, this was the picture of it. And what you don't see in that picture is that we're beginning to see the little gumballs. And so we just look at it every day. And we smelled the leaf. And what I like about this leaf is, you know, it's got five little points, so it spells its name, SWEET, and then the three big ones, BUM. And so really my approach with working with my own daughter is to let her observe, to just put her out there and just let her curiosity guide where we go and what we do. And I think that for me has been much more successful than doing any, you know, specific activity. And I've learned a lot just from her own observations. So that's my soapbox about kids and nature.
Oh, that's great. That is really all that we had sort of set up, and we're already at about 12:15. So, you know, I won't pressure folks if they want to stick around, but if anybody else who is on the line today wants to put in any other questions at the last minute, you also can feel free, if you want, you're welcome to unmute yourself at this point, and you can ask a couple of questions. We'll maybe stick around for 5 more minutes and see if folks have anything.
I just had a question about black gum. Could that be a good alternative? Does that have the sticky balls?
No sticky balls, but that's a great great choice.
Thank you.
This is Laura O'Callahan. Are there any sources for designing solely with natives?
Yes, and I'm totally drawing a blank. Guys, help me, jump in. Yes, this is what I do for, you know, I did this for a living for 15 years.
Well, some of the, you know, all those native plant guides in Virginia all have guidance on designing with natives, and what natives go best together. We actually teach about designing with natives through the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. Last week, I think on the webinar last week, there is a book on designing and landscaping in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And there was a whole, you know, it has to do with designing with natives, and Doug Ptolemy and
Rick Dark
Yeah,
have a really nice book.
yeah, I've looked at their book, but it's really a matter of, and I've taken a course at Mount Cuba about designing, but I'm looking about how you lay out your beds, how you do, you know, big design layouts, how you would create a watershed or a wetlands kind of area. You know, I just don't see any books saying you would do the larger plants in the front. I don't care about the house or, you know, the patio. I just want to lay out gardens using natives and shrubs and trees.
Well, the philosophies of designing aren't really any different in terms of designing, you know, how you would lay out a bed. It's just your choice
of plants,
plant material. And then the other concept that we push is look at plants as a plant community. So design as a plant community. So if you're looking at a wetland area, you're going to want to choose plants that grow naturally in that wet environment together.
right?
And that would, so that one picture that I showed you of that wet area, that I went for a walk in nature, and that's where I got my cues to how I would compose the plants. But I don't know.
I would also say Claudia West and Thomas Rainier's book, Planting in a Post-Wild World. If you don't have that, I would definitely put your hands on that one. And also Larry Wiener's book, Garden Revolution. Both of those came out maybe 3-4 years ago, and I think those are very good resources to help you develop your design style and philosophy.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. I think that's probably good. We've run a little bit long, so I appreciate everyone that stuck with us. I just want to give a huge thank you to Beth and Suzanne and Shireen for joining us today and giving us all of that great advice and wisdom. Beth, you have joined us 2 weeks in a row, so I extra appreciate that. And it's glad to have you back again for a second week. And I really encourage you, if you enjoyed today's webcast, please, you can go over to our website and you can sign up for the next 2 weeks. Hopefully you will enjoy them just as much as you did today. It's a bunch of different topics. You know, but even if you're forestry folks, you know, you can enjoy our stormwater art talks and some of our family gardening stuff as well. So, you know, please feel free. Also, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. You can reach me at wood.csn@outlook.com if you have any other questions. Like I said, I'll get the recording and the slides posted for you guys, if not by the end of today, early next week by, you know, Monday at the latest. So you can go over and check that out as well. So. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. Thanks for joining. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you, David, for putting
Thanks
this
for
together.
organizing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
You all have been very good. We really enjoyed it.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.